In the last couple of years, there's no denying that the Australia-China relationship has probably hit an all-time low. Despite this, iron ore trade remains significant economically speaking for both countries. And in fact, in 2020 to 2021, Australia's iron ore exports to China actually increased. Aside from their economic significance, this is an important issue to look at when we're talking about sustainability. In the context of COP26 in Glasgow, where it's an opportunity to really discuss which sectors we can look at to decarbonise, and steel production is one of those for Australia and China.
Steel making is a highly energy intensive and emission intensive industry. It consumes around 8.5% of global energy consumption. Just to put in context with other industries, this is the same level as the entire road passenger transport emissions. And this is more than 4 times as much emissions as from the aviation sector. Primary steel making or the virgin steel making route involves iron ore and coking coal. This is the most energy intensive and emission intensive process. 90% of carbon dioxide emissions happens in this process. China is the largest steel producer in the world. 91% of the steel produced is used within the country itself. A part of it is also used in the products that gets exported. So the steel that China produces has a lot of value for the economy.
Australia and China mutually depend on each other for the iron ore production and trade relationship. The vast majority, over 80% of Australian iron ore goes to China, and Australia is really the single largest source for iron ore used in China. Of course, China over time could substitute to other sources of iron ore, imported from elsewhere, but there's really not much reason to do so because you want to stick with an established supply relationship and you want to go to the lowest cost producers, of course. And so we would expect, no matter what happens, for Australian iron ore to continue to be the mainstay of steel that is produced either in China or for China.
China has set a target of reaching net zero by 2060 and peak emissions by 2030, which means that steel emissions have to be addressed.
If we want to think about how to make steel in a green way without carbon dioxide emissions, then the most likely pathway is going to be using hydrogen as a fuel instead. So when we shift from coal to a fuel that has no carbon in it, the gases that come out of the furnace, instead of being CO2, are just water vapor and the other components of the air. So there's no carbon involved in the process. And this requires changing the way the furnace is set up. In this case, hydrogen would be generated from electrolysis, which would be powered by renewable electricity like solar panels or wind. The work that needs to be done to make all this happen is obviously huge expansion in our renewable energy, but also a lot of work to figure out how to build these new furnaces that use hydrogen instead of coal. If we were to produce green steel in Australia from that iron ore, that iron ore that we currently export, if we were to do that by making hydrogen from electrolyzers, then we would need a lot of electricity. In fact, we would need something like 7 times the current Australian production of electricity in the national electricity market.
The answer to that will lie in locating that industry where we've got the cheapest sources of clean energy and where we can minimize transport cost for iron ore. That would put countries like Australia in the absolute vanguard of a global green steel industry.
We're trying to figure out whether we can do this kind of green steel thing at a really large scale. It's immediately intriguing, the fact that we have most of our iron ore, more than 90% of it, coming from the Pilbara region in northwest Australia, which happens to be one of the best places in the world for solar energy. So there's this really cheap renewable energy opportunity there. If we put out a lot of solar panels there, we can make electricity maybe 30% cheaper than somewhere like Eastern China or Western Europe or something, right? It's a significant cost advantage. So could we maybe use the renewable energy in the Pilbara together with the ore that's also already in the Pilbara? And could we do, could it be that it's cheaper to do the initial stage of iron making there in that part of the world?
Australia and China have a traditionally very important economic and trade relationship. That relationship has been under strain for political reasons in recent years. Getting green steel right, getting the decarbonisation of the global steel industry underway will inevitably include both China as the world's largest steel producer, and it will inevitably include Australia as the world's largest iron ore producer and a substantial producer of coking coal as well, and as one of the countries that can produce renewable zero carbon energy at very, very large scale for export industries. And so collaboration would be an obvious advantage to get that right for the two countries, but also to get it right for the world.
Working together to produce green steel would be an opportunity not just environmentally, but for Australia and China politically to work together. That's definitely not an easy feat given the political quagmire that the two countries have been in currently and in recent years, but it's certainly an opportunity that both must take. Despite these political constraints, it's crucial for these two countries to put climate action first and to work together for a more sustainable and prosperous economic future.